Hi, this is California Convictions. I'm Aaron Channel, and I speak regularly about my experiences in prison, what it's like to be locked up, really anything anybody's interested in. I haven't been posting regularly for a long time, so I'm still getting back into the swing of things. My audio quality isn't perfect, my fancy pants microphone isn't hooked up, but I've been pretty happy with what I've been able to do so far, and I look forward to continuing to speak on these subjects. Today I wanted to speak about being less than 100% physically in prison. Some guys go into prison disabled. Maybe you have an actual real infirmity. You're missing a leg or an arm, or you have a terrible limp. It can even be something smaller. For myself, I just wasn't in great health. I'm premature. I was born well premature, and as such, I've got a bad heart, bad lungs, a bunch of little things. I remember my first real workout in San Quentin. I went out there planning on hitting it with the homies and, demonstrating that I could be an asset or a resource. And I started doing those burpees and chain breakers, cherry pickers, all the things they were doing. It was about 10 minutes in. And I was red and huffing, and I about fell out. I had to grab my homie and kind of hold myself up, and they walked me over to the drinking fountain. It's an escort thing. You need at least 3 people to walk over to the drinking fountain in this circumstance. This was on a serious yard. They got me some water, and they sat me down next to the old timers, the guys that were 40 and older working out. And they said, "Hey, Channel, you just work out with these guys for a little while and see how you feel after a couple of weeks." There is a mandatory workout. You got to be out there doing something. But they don't expect you to be in perfect physical condition. It's unreasonable to expect that a guy in his 40s who maybe has a little bit of punch is going to be able to keep up with a guy in his 20s that's a soldier and been driving every day for the past 3 years. So, they tend to have a sliding scale for what it is they expect out of you physically. And the basic rule is try. Get out there and try and do something. They say we're here to make a wood, not break a wood. And they mean they're there to help you get strong, help you get better, whatever that might mean to you. They're not there to put you in the dirt and grind you down and yell at you to the point that you want to quit and give up because it's too hard. You're supposed to get right before that point. That's the goal. Of course, you can have things that you're not going to overcome just by working out every stinking day. You may have a serious neurological problem. Epilepsy. Some people in prison have epilepsy. It's not common as such, but I met a number of guys that had it. It's an interesting fact that you can be written up for not using whatever prescriptive appliance or thing that they give you in prison. If they give you a cane because you have a limp, you must use that cane. If they see you outside without the cane, they can write you up and say, hey, he doesn't need the cane, so either you need to take it from him or you need to punish him for not using it if he does need it. This is a bummer for people with epilepsy. Guys with epilepsy in prison are issued a helmet. It's a little soft helmet to protect their heads if they fall. It's difficult for somebody who has a seizure perhaps every year or even less often but needs to be medicated to have to wear a helmet all the stinking time. I absolutely saw a couple of guys written up for not wearing their helmet. Similarly, I had a CPAP machine because I have sleep apnea. Incredibly severe case, actually, for what it's worth. The doctor said it was one of the worst he'd seen, but I have a machine that assists my breathing whenever I'm asleep. It's a simple enough thing. It's just a fan that connects to a hose and then to a mask that I put over my face, and it makes sure that I'm breathing. And if I stop breathing, it pushes air into my lungs and I resume breathing. In the event that for whatever reason, maybe I had a cold or I was getting a sore on my face from wearing the mask too much or anything like that, and I elected to not use it, they absolutely had the option of writing me up for it. You must use a prescriptive appliance if it's given to you. And then in the event that you talk with the doctor afterwards and he says you had a good reason for not using it, they'll dismiss the write-up. Infirmity, disability, sickness in prison is a bummer because prison is a scary place, and I mean for everybody. I don't care who you are. Anybody who says they did a bunch of time and they were never scared, well, either they don't feel fear in the same way normal people do, they have a different line, maybe they're built wrong, built different, or they're lying. Because it's not all the time. It's in fact very rarely that anything bad happens, but there's always the potential for something bad happening. The yard can go from a normal, everyday, you're hanging out with your friends playing cards, to there are 12 guys with knives running right at you and your couple of friends because they managed to isolate you from the herd. It is unlikely. It never happened to me. I never saw it happen. But at the time I was incarcerated on other yards, other prisons, yes, that type of thing does happen. It can have nothing to do with you. It can just be that you are the wrong gang, the wrong skin color, in the wrong place at the wrong time. Because this is an environment where there are predators. There are people who are looking to hurt other people for whatever reason. If you are young, fit, ready to handle your business, you have much better odds of survival, not just because you can fight off the guy running at you, but because you're less likely to get singled out. It's one of the reasons that serious yards have some policies, and at least 10 years ago had some policies, about how many people can do what. You want to go to the drinking fountain, you want to go to the restroom, you want to go walk around the yard, whatever it is. You don't go by yourself if you're on a 180 that's tense. You get your friends. It's 3, 4, maybe 5 people is the minimum to do something, because if something goes wrong, you got to have a clump of people to get back with your group, to get back with your people. Hi, Shalise J. Girl, and Christina Justice says that she's glad that I'm doing well, and I really am. NorCal says that he just finished 3 years from 14 to 17 in Placer County. 3 years is a chunk. It's amazing how few in Northern California people I met in prison, even in Northern California prisons, outside of Sacramento, which has its gangs, its groups, and quite a few inmates per capita, I suppose. It didn't feel like there were many people who I could talk to and mention Mendocino County, Siskiyou County, Placer County, any of these Northern California counties, and people had no idea where I was talking about. They go, that's Northern California, right? Being sick in prison is a beast unto itself. Diseases will run through a dormitory or a building like a plague. I remember being housed in Chino, and a norovirus went through the dorm that I was in. It went through all of the dorms at the institution as far as I know, but it was the dorm that I was in that I had an experience with because they locked the institution down once they had a confirmed case of norovirus. Nobody was leaving the building they were in. They tried to reduce the transmissibility of it, try and reduce the number of people that had it. For anybody who doesn't know, a norovirus is a very contagious virus which is transmitted whenever people don't sufficiently wash their hands after using the restroom, and it's very contagious and spreads very quickly. The problem is that the symptomology includes really drastic expulsion from both ends, we'll say, you and you. As a result, it was impossible to avoid getting it in a dormitory because there were 50 people who were so sick that they were lying down on the floor occasionally, that they weren't getting out of bed, and whenever they did get out of bed, they were running to the communal restroom. Whenever you're sharing 10, maybe 12 toilets amongst 400 people, 300 people, 110 people, whatever number of people they managed to cram into one of these little dorms, yeah, everything is contaminated. And it was brutal. Because whenever everybody is sick, 100 and something people are sick, suddenly the shared facilities, the showers, the sinks, the restrooms, that you're used to being just barely enough for the number of people, because of course they're going to keep cramming inmates into the building until they have just barely enough facilities to use. It's not enough, because everybody's sick. They're using these facilities 2, 3, 4 times as much as usual. As a result, it was a unsanitary and frankly awful living condition whenever you would have a real virus go through a dormitory or a building. Some of the things that would come through buildings, the diseases, were surprising. Chickenpox was a common one. Because I am a native U.S. resident, and perhaps because of the region that I grew up in, I had chicken pox whenever I was growing up. I think most people did in my age group, and I understand that most people older than me have been vaccinated for it. However, in institutions, there are often a lot of people who are recent immigrants. There are often a lot of people who grew up outside of the grid here in the United States. Maybe they didn't get their vaccinations. Maybe they just managed to avoid getting sick. So there were numerous occasions where I saw institutions locked down for chickenpox because a percentage of people had it, and it is so communicable that they decided it was safer just to shut the institution down rather than risk that it spread to the inmates who could get it. Thinking of disability, and I've told the story before, but it's such an interesting story to me that there was an occasion whenever I was at High Desert where there was a guy in a wheelchair. And he could stand. He was able to get out of his wheelchair and move around, and he was theoretically recovering, but he was also overweight, he was in poor health, and I don't know if he ever actually got out of the wheelchair or whether he continued to use it part-time for the rest of his life. But he was messing up. He wasn't coming out to yard, he had a soft check coming. And everybody kind of looked at each other like, well, who wants to be the guy that walks up on a dude in a wheelchair and teaches him a lesson that he has to listen to what the fellas say? I don't want to be the guy that beats up somebody in a wheelchair. There's 100 reasons why not, but one that people might not consider is that if you go to court, if you have witnesses and suddenly it's an assault, maybe he gets hurt more than you meant him to, maybe falls out of the chair and dies, God forbid. Well, you're suddenly in a situation where the district attorney is pointing out that you're victimizing an old, helpless man because of prison rules. So everybody was kind of looking at each other, and slowly maybe somebody was going to raise their hand and volunteer to be the guy that did it, but nobody wanted to. And a gentleman, we'll call him Frank for the purposes of this video, who was actually disabled and in a wheelchair and was never going to be out of a wheelchair. He was paralyzed from the waist down, and it wasn't going to change. He was off to the side. I got it. This one's me. And the shop caller looked over at him and said, well, Frank, you're good, man. You ain't got to do none of this. Because that's the fact of the matter, is that they expect people to do what they can. And if you're actually disabled, you're paralyzed from the waist down, you're missing an arm, you have an awful limp, whatever it is, they don't expect you to be out there busting out burpees all day, and whenever somebody needs to get checked, they're not going to tell you, all right, Frank, go do it. I know you're in a wheelchair, but you'll figure it out. Still, Frank argued his case. He said, look, I've been here a while. I haven't put in any work. I'm all right. Let's do it. It's not like I'm going to get in real trouble for it. I'm in a chair too, and any one of y'all might actually get, sent to the whole real big thing. And so, yeah, they gave Frank the job. Whenever this guy that won't come out to yard, won't participate in the mandatory workout, thinks he's better than the prison rules, whenever he goes to canteen here on Tuesday, we want you to get him. And sure enough, you watched Frank from all the way across the yard start thump, thump, with his wheelchair picking up speed. By the time he crashed in to Leonard, the dude that had a check coming, he had to be going 20 miles an hour, and they both went flying. I don't think Leonard saw it coming at all. And it was the most incredible thing, because as they impacted, Frank got two hands on the lapel. And they kind of did a half spin in the air and rolled on the ground, and he kept his hands on the guy's lapel, because otherwise he would have had to belly crawl over to where he was after they both lost their chairs. He was actually paralyzed from the waist down. And once he got two hands on this dude and they finished scuffling back and forth to the point that they'd finished rolling, he got up on one elbow, threw himself up, and BAM! There were two, maybe three solid whomps before he backed off a little bit. The cops got there, and it was over. There was a lot more medical involvement in this particular fight than in most. They brought over a gurney for both of the guys and took them to medical and evaluated them pretty thoroughly, I'm sure. It was a unique thing that I saw, which I thought really demonstrated the way prison works in some ways. Where you had the one guy who was sick and old and didn't want to come out to yard, and the other guy who was sick and old and did want to come out to yard. The one guy was programming, the other wasn't. And, well, the one guy ended up getting checked pretty hard, and the other guy ended up getting a write-up a couple of months, but at the end of the story, they both came out to yard again. They weren't enemies, they signed off, and in fact, Leonard even apologized. Said, yeah, all right, I was screwing up, I should have listened whenever y'all told me to. As far as prison stories go, it's a happy ending. I realize that somebody getting their face pulped up a little bit doesn't sound like a happy ending. But consider that so many of these stories end up with people going to the hole, people going to the infirmary, and these are better case scenarios than people picking up a case or people ending up dead. This was just a check. NorCal 530 says, I was surprised how few people didn't know where Auburn is. You have an awesome channel. I'm surprised you don't have more subscribers. Well, thank you so much for saying it's an awesome channel, but I haven't put out enough content recently. This is my second video in a long time, so the subscriber has to be at least partially on me. I tell you what, is I'll keep doing these live streams, I'll put out some regular content, and we'll see if my subscriber count doesn't go up just a little bit. SC Community says, evening channel, glad to see you here. Sounds like a lot of your community has been missing out on their story time. I figured it was just a brief break. You're absolutely correct, it was a break. Frankly, talking about some of this stuff can be, and I realize this sounds overly dramatic, but it can be emotionally taxing. Dude, prison was hard. And most people who get out of prison, they tell all their friends, don't worry man, I'll write you, I'll visit you, I promise. But they don't. Some of them are liars, of course, but the thing is that most of them are really sincere. I had a lot of guys tell me, don't worry, I'm going to write you when I get out, I'm going to send you a package, whatever it is. And I never took it personally whenever they didn't, and none of them did. Because you get out of prison, and it's just, you want to put it behind you. You don't want to think about it anymore. Whenever you're there, it's real and immediate and in your face. And the more distance that you can get from it, the safer you feel, the calmer you feel. The easier life is if you pretend like it's not someplace you might go back. On the other hand, not talking about these things, just locking them up in a little box and putting it in your stomach and never thinking about it again, well, that can't be healthy. I've elected to view doing these live streams as a type of therapy. I hope it's great for y'all. I'm going to keep doing it on the assumption that maybe somebody will have fun watching it, maybe somebody will learn something, maybe I'll actually help somebody. But even if that little view count there on my screen says there are 0 people watching, I'm going to keep doing it. It's good for me. I feel like I have made it through some difficult issues just by talking to this camera, and I say thank you for listening in a lot of these videos. I really do mean it. Thank you for participating in this process with me, because knowing that there's somebody on the other side of the camera makes it easier for me to talk about this. Theoretically makes it easier for me to get over, I guess, prison. NorCal 530 says the miner doesn't look too big until you're... Absolutely, the mine looks big whenever you're standing to it. The gold miner in Auburn is what they're talking about, and it is a beautiful statue. I just went through Auburn recently, actually, and took a picture of that specific statue. How funny. Gina Lester's happy to see me back. NorCal, I did not get any tattoos whenever I was locked up, though I did consider a back piece that I wanted. It was MC Escher did something called Angels and Demons, and it's a beautiful photo of an angel and a demon like this interlocked so that the black side is on one and the white side is on the other. And you don't realize that you're looking at a picture of two things. It's like the classic picture of the duck that's also a rabbit. It's a beautiful thing, and I believed that if I was willing to have it done big enough, it would have, looked great. But tattoos in prison make me nervous. Hepatitis C is rampant. It's something like 20 to 30% of inmates, back when I was doing time, I don't know what the numbers are today, had hepatitis C. And now, of course, if you get your own gun, your own needle, your own ink, you're pretty damn safe. It's not like they're intentionally going to infect you with something. I just got nervous, decided not to take the risk, and frankly, I never had the real drive to get a tattoo. As Slick Armor points out that I got a room full of people watching, and I really do. Hey, thank you guys so much. Well, the subject of the day, and if anybody wants to hear about anything else, you toss a question out in the comments, but the subject of the day is being sick, disabled, infirm in prison. Something that I might as well address is mental infirmity, people who were actually crazy. And I don't mean people who had a slightly different worldview, maybe the guy who mutters under his breath to himself every once in a while. I mean people who had a difficult time dealing with prison because they weren't all there. I knew a dude who was OCD, and I felt so bad for him. I ate dinner with him a lot of the time, and you could see he had a hard time eating because the food wasn't properly prepared the way he would have liked. He wanted every ingredient set aside, and he'd try and pull his ingredients away. But he'd end up not eating a lot of the food on his tray. There were a lot of things he said he couldn't eat because of his obsessive compulsive disorder. He couldn't write in cursive either, which I thought was amazing. I asked him one time what were the things about being OCD that were difficult for him. And he said that he couldn't write in cursive. The squiggly lines just bothered him, so he always had to sign his name in block letters. You know, another gentleman who just didn't understand where he was, I guess. He walked around muttering to himself all day. He was a white guy and he hung out with the white guys, but if you talked to him, he couldn't quite make sense. Like you'd go up to him and say, "Hey Frank, you gotta come over here with us." And he'd say something like, "Well, yeah, the bananas are on the roof." The bananas are on the roof, Frank? And if you talked to him for a minute or two, he could realign with you. And if you gave him simple instructions, he could follow them. But this is back whenever there were cigarettes. And he had a nasty habit of picking up snipes. These are the little cigarette butts off the ground. This is something that out in the real world, impoverished people sometimes do. If you're a smoker and you have no way to afford cigarettes, you start looking in ashtrays for other people's butts. And you get 10 or 15 of them, and you get them and you roll them out, and you roll your own cigarette. He got the crap beat out of him. He got checked, really checked, and did not come back to the yard because the fellas kept telling him, "You can't do this. It's making us look bad. This is against the rules. White people do not pick cigarettes up off the ground." But he didn't have the comprehension to really get that something was going to happen to him over it. I tried to talk to him about it at one point, and there was no point in trying to communicate this concept to him because he was incapable of figuring it out. Of course, there are some people who are sick by societal standards that do reasonably well in prison. Sociopaths, for instance, that just don't have that emotional affect, can do anything and not feel bad about it afterwards. Well, there's a place for you in the gang if you want it. Similarly, the pedophiles, those pieces of garbage that out in the real world, nobody will give them the time of day. Oh gosh, I can't imagine somebody like Roy Norris, one of the most monstrous men that I met in my life. Not just a pedophile, but a serial murderer of innocent children. Trying to get by in the real world where people knew what he had done. We'd be shunned or beaten or killed within a day. But prison is a constrained environment. And what they do is they get all of these types of people and they put them in a pretty small box together along with anybody who's willing to habitate with them. I ended up there because I was protective custody, SNY. I had problems with the gangs, and so I was just trying to survive. But it was incredible to be around these people who were sick in a very different context and see how they act amongst each other whenever they're not hiding who they are. NorCal said that he had his own gun and ink, and he kind of regrets getting some tattoos. Every time he gets out of the shower, it reminds him of his 3-year vacation. Something that I often mentioned to, and there were a small percentage of people in prison who were criminals, meaning that they planned to start committing crimes right whenever they got out. And they had been committing crimes before they got arrested. Some people commit crimes of passion. Some people commit crimes of desperation. Some people are just criminals. It was always funny talking to the criminals, the guys that this is how they made their living and it's what they planned on doing for the rest of their lives. Whenever I'd ask them, "Why are you all tatted up, man?" I mean, I get the idea that you want to present who you are and that you earned some of that ink. But at the same time, these are distinguishing characteristics. You understand whenever they are doing the interview with the guy who you hit in the back of the head with a brick and took his wallet, he's going to say, well, I don't know much, but I saw the word number 73 tattooed on his wrist at least. And they're going to really be able to pin down the number of people who could have done it based on just a simple tattoo or two. I may be having some difficulty streaming. I just got a little yellow marker saying that I am not putting out enough data. So if I'm buffering or if you can't understand what I'm saying, sorry, hopefully it'll get better over time, but I'm glad to be talking regardless. Roy Norris did die in prison, for anybody who doesn't know. I mentioned him, and he was a monster. I seem to recall that he killed less than 20, but 15, 17 young girls. I think the youngest was 12 or 13. Him and his partner, Bittaker. Bittaker received the death penalty, and Norris got life in prison and died alone in a cell, and I hope they beat him pretty good on the way out. That's just my personal resentments coming through. Another truly monstrous man that I met who was sick in his own way, and not just sick because he'd killed young boys, but sick because he was dumb. And I mean dumb as in I think his IQ was probably around 75, maybe 80. You'd talk to him and you'd see his eyes kind of glaze over and he'd try and understand. Was Miley. And he did get beat to death on the yard. I remember reading the report in a little news article that he had been beaten to death on a yard, had went to medical and told him he got hurt. Nobody cared. They told him to go back to his cell, and he died of cerebral hemorrhage that night in his cell. I didn't see much vigilante justice meted out in prison. I didn't see many people who got hurt who really deserved the harm they received. And I did see a lot of guys who got hurt who, frankly, I didn't feel like they deserved it. But this would be one gentleman who he cannot have suffered enough on the way out the door. Again, that's probably just my anger, my personal opinions coming through, but you make a life out of hurting innocent people, thank God somebody got the chance to get rid of you. Again, my personal. Gina Lester asks about mental disorders like autism, schizophrenia, and MPD. That's actually an interesting question. And the way this is going to work is that people who are deemed to be incapable of standing trial, meaning that you got arrested and they looked at you and, wow, this guy's obviously crazy. He committed a crime because he's not right in his head. They don't go to prison. They don't even go to trial. They are found not guilty by reason of insanity, and they're sent to a mental institution. A lot of guys in prison think this is the way to go. My co-defendant, August Stuckey, tried to present that he was not guilty by reason of insanity. The idea is that doing your time in a mental asylum will be easier than doing your time in prison. After all, it's a hospital instead of a prison. I had the opportunity to talk to a couple of guys who had been in or worked in these type of places, and it's a yes and no type of thing. Yes, if you're sincerely crazy, if you have schizophrenia, if you're severely autistic, which is not actually crazy, but if you're far enough incompetent to the point that they can't reasonably try you, you cannot assist in your own defense, you can't say to the cops, it's not my fault, this guy was beating me up and I just defended myself. Even if it's true or not true, you can't present that defense because you're incompetent to do it. You're not sane enough. They send you to a mental institution. And there you will be medicated. You do not have the option of refusing medication, and they will put you on whatever it is that they think you should be on. In many cases, this results in people being well over-medicated to the point of not being able to interact with the environment around them. It's not quite One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. They're not doing forced lobotomies in a back room. But doing time in a mental institution, as I understand it, is awful in its own way. And you will not be released. That's the truly awful thing, is that if you are found to be criminally insane, is the terminology, you're going to stay there in that mental institution until something changes. Until either the doctors say that you've worked through your issues, or they find the right combination of medications that might help you. And then they'll determine whether or not to send you to prison, whether or not the next step is you're going to trial, or whether or not you can be released because you are sane. The guys that I met in prison who were they had mental problems, I don't think very many of them were actually to the point that they should have been institutionalized. Frank, the gentleman who was picking up cigarette butts off the yard, perhaps he should have. He had a low IQ, he had difficulty understanding what was going on around him, and I think he was suffering from mild hallucinations because I saw him interacting with things that frankly weren't there. The problem is that there are so many inmates that are pretending to be crazy. They're for whatever. Maybe they want to get out of the trouble they're in. Maybe they think they can get to an easier yard if they're a little crazy and they convince the cops of it. Maybe they're playing the long game and they want to get moved to a mental institution and maybe escape from there. I don't know what their plan is. But a lot of the inmates pretend to be crazy. Get meds, get moved, whatever your goal is. And so, the people who are actually moderately mentally infirm, they can slip through the cracks. Because it's the duty of the administration, of the doctors and the cops, to try and not send the people who are faking to a hospital. And of course, whenever you have so many fakers, one or two truth tellers are going to slip through the cracks. It's a sad reality. A lot of people left the shoe really decompensated. I spent a little bit of time in the hole here or there. I think the longest I spent was 6 months, and the longest time that I actually spent on walk alone, meaning that I was in a concrete room by myself with nobody else, was about a month, maybe a month and a half. And yeah, you can lose your mind real easy. A lot of people do. I recall on one occasion hearing an inmate start yelling out his door, "Help, help, help," and the cops came and he was just, "I can't be here anymore, I'm losing my mind, you gotta help me." And of course, they have no interest in him and they left, and he started yelling again a couple hours later, "Help, I need out of here, God, I gotta get out of here, I can't do this." Well, all they did was they got him out of there. They put him in handcuffs and they moved him to a partitioned area of 8 cells that had glass walls around it. It was 8 cells all in a row. You could see in. You could see the guy still at his door, pounding on the door and yelling. But you couldn't hear anything because those were glass walls. The only time you could hear is whenever they would open up the door so that they could go into that little partitioned area and feed the inmates who were problems for whatever reason. And they'd leave that door open for a couple of minutes, and then you could just faintly hear him still yelling, "Help, somebody help me, I can't be here." I don't know how long he kept yelling, but I can tell you they left him in that little glass partitioned area indefinitely. That's the thing about these concrete walls, that steel rebar, is it doesn't matter how strong you are, how hard you are. You're not harder than that. They're still there. You can change however you want. You can grow however you want. You can promise you're going to be a better person or a worse person, whatever the story is you're telling yourself. The concrete and the steel doesn't move. And if you break, which some men will, it's just a reality, some men are going to break. Well, concrete and the steel is still going to be there, and it doesn't matter how broken you are and how broken you get. They're not going to let you out of that box one day earlier because of it. You are absolutely correct, Slick Armor, that your cellmates can just be nut jobs. I've told the story before, but I'll mention again that I had an occasion where I woke up from sleep. I went to bed a little bit early, and I woke up to my cellie crashing his TV down on the ground. And he had his hands wrapped with gloves, and he reached down and he got a big hunk of glass from his shattered TV, and he rushed at me. And I came down, I managed to neutralize the position. I'd been asleep, but I had a sheet in my hand, and I came down and tried to wrap it, and he had to back off. So we never actually got to the point that I was punching him and he was stabbing me. He backed off whenever he realized it was going to be a fight instead of a murder. But the reason he did this was the most absurd thing I'd ever heard. We were in protective custody at this point, and he was under the impression that I was going to kill him because he was in protective custody. He was Norteño, as I recall, and I was white. I had no interest in whatever his politics were, and he wasn't even really running from the gang like he'd informed on high-level people or he'd stolen the drugs from the yard. He just got in trouble and decided to roll up and left. But in his head, because he was just a little paranoid, a little schizophrenic, when he got the idea that I might be coming for him, it just got bigger and bigger. To the point that he thought that I had a piece up there. That I was just waiting for him to go to sleep and I was going to kill him in his sleep. And Well, if that's the case, he'd better come at me first, right? That's common sense. Get them before they get you. And that's the thing, is that whenever somebody has a different perception of reality than you got to be really careful, because you don't know what's going on in their head. They didn't hear the same stinking words that you said. You said, "Hey, Jimmy, I hope you're having a nice night." And he heard, "Jimmy, you better go to sleep soon because I got something for you." It's a scary environment to be in. Ugh. Dave says solitary, especially the indeterminate shoe, sounds horrific. Many people must have gone nuts in there. And absolutely, for people who don't know, indeterminate shoe is a sentence reserved for people who the administration determines are persistent security threats. Generally, it's because you're an active participant in a gang. They've decided that you're good enough in the gang that whenever you hit the yard, you start calling shots and people listen to you. Or you're the guy who knows all the codes and is sending out the kites. Whatever it is, you're a ranking member of the gang. Well, they want to cut off the head of the gang. So rather than just saying, "We caught you for this one thing, we caught you with a knife, and so you're going to go to the shoe for 6 months," they say, "We keep catching you with knives, so you're going to go to the shoe for forever. We're not going to let you out." They started back in the 80s doing this with some of the high-ranking members of the gangs, like the Aryan Brotherhood, the Black Guerrilla Family, the MA. And that's all they did, is they just got everybody they could find and sent them to Pelican Bay, and made little divisioned areas of Pelican Bay where the cells would never stinking open. They'll roll the shower up to you, or they have a shower that just a couple of inmates are going to share. If you have a phone call coming, they're going to escort you out very carefully. You're never going to really interact with the people around you. And it's not just that this is the environment where you're alone with just you and your cellie and maybe the 10 or 15 other people who live in cells around you that you can communicate with. It's that they told you indeterminate. You have a life sentence. You will not be getting out of prison. You're going to die here. And when we say here, we mean here in this cell. We're not letting you out of this area. You have a life sentence and a life shoe. The court came down on that. They said that that was draconian, is the word they used. And now the limit is 7 years. 7 years is the longest time they can sentence you to spend in the shoe, which is still an incredible amount of time. And it's a low bar. If you get sent for an indeterminate shoe, which now means 7 years or less, and they find any reason to extend it, for instance, they find you communicating with another gang member, you get a letter from a gang member, you break a rule that they can prove is somehow related to why you're in the shoe, that 7 years starts over. It's 7 years from the time they decided you had this indeterminate shoe coming, and they'll re-up it for any reason they can. Imagine measuring out your life like that. I was fortunate. The longest that I did back in the hole was probably 6 months, and the longest I ever did on walk alone was probably like a month and a half, something like that. It's enough. I got a taste of it, and I didn't want any more. Same as how I did about 16 and a half years in prison, and I will tell you, it was enough. That post-traumatic stress disorder gets you. It's a strange thing being out because you're just waiting for them to send you back. Part of you never really believes they were going to let you go. I've been off paper for a year. I've been out of prison for 4. I still wake up sometimes looking around trying to figure out why that concrete and steel isn't hugging me so tight anymore. Seems strange. I'll be honest that I'm a little bit at a loss for what to talk about. I wanted to speak primarily about being disabled or infirm in prison. I can mention my friend Samurai. We weren't close, but he was good friends with a good friend of mine, my boy Dutch. So we spent a lot of time together. Frankly, I'm not sure that Samurai liked me very much. He was a hard man. I mean, he was a fighter and a scrapper, and he was out working out all day. And if we're frank, I'm a reader. Don't get me wrong, I can handle myself, but while they were out doing burpees, I was watching TV. Well, Samurai had the interesting distinction that he was missing his left hand, right here at the wrist. He'd ran from the cops, got in a car accident, and that was the result of the accident. His hand was gone. I saw him have a problem with somebody one time, and he led with a left, stumped him, right in the face like a jab and then came in with a right cross. It was beautiful. You could tell the dude had practiced it, and it must have hurt because you have a lot of nerve endings there. But he put this dude on the dirt so fast, and I remember kind of chuckling to myself that in this occasion, his disability had been an asset. Not because he was able to punch with it, of course, but because he was underestimated. The guy just assumed that since the guy was missing a hand, he could push up on him and push him around a little bit and he'd just back down. But Samurai was a scrapper. He wasn't going to take guff from anybody. Which goes to show that you have the tools you have at your disposal, whatever they might be. Whether it's your muscles or your brain or, hell, the stump of your left hand. And whenever that's all you have in prison, you learn to use that. That's really the thing about prison that stood out to me was whatever environment you're in, your resources are so limited. People learn to make a lighter out of paper clips and a toothbrush. You learn how to get a light off of the lamp up in your cell by taking a graphite rod and putting it between the leads. You learn how to make a knife out of just a little piece of steel or aluminum that you cut off of something and spend a couple of hours working on. Because whenever all you have is this very short list of tools they provided to you, well, you learn how to use them. Gino Lester asks, what's the process if you needed anxiety meds or pain meds for disabilities? And that's an interesting question. Anxiety meds were given out pretty easily, which if you had, but they're not going to be the medications that you're quite used to on the streets. I didn't hear of anybody having a Prozac prescription, for instance, or anything like it. It was always drugs that I'd never quite heard of, things like Seroquel or Wellbutrin was common for a little while, though they quit giving that out because the inmates kept snorting it. It's pretty easy to get these drugs, but most of the anxiety meds are referred to as heat meds. Because if you look in the contraindications and side effects section of the pamphlet that they give you whenever you receive a medication, often it will note that you need to stay out of direct sunlight, that you shouldn't get too overheated because these medications result in your not being able to shed heat properly. That's why they call them heat meds in California prison. They have a policy. If it is 90 degrees outside, anybody who is on these medications must go back inside because it's too hot for them and they could get sick. As a result, the gangs have a policy. Nobody on the yard can take heat meds. This is a harsh reality for people who are used to whatever small medication they might be used to taking. Because if you had 20 guys in your gang who are on heat meds out of the 60 guys on the yard, they announce that UHT warning, and they all 20 have to go in. They have no choice in it. The cops will come and shut down the yard and round them up. They have a list of who they are. Well, the other gang can just wait for those 20 guys to go and go get them and then go jump you. Or if they wanted to get one of those guys specifically, they could just set up an ambush in their building. They know where he's going to be and when. So the gangs have a policy. You can't be on a lot of these psychiatric medications if you want to walk the main line. The only way that you can continue to take these pills is to go tell the cops, I can't be here, and then they'll put you on the other side of the prison where they keep the pedophiles and the rapists, the rats, all those guys. The fact of the matter is that the yards I was on had a relatively small percentage of actual monsters, by which I mean pedophiles and rapists and sex offenders. And what they had was like 10% of those guys. And then another 20 or 30% of guys who were gang members that had to drop out. Guys that had real problems. You know, that's Frankie B. Don't you know the Aryan Brotherhood wants to kill him? And that's Jimmy J over there. He's got a problem with the MA. The rest of the yard was just guys who couldn't program for whatever reason. It was a lot of guys who needed heat meds, and so they got sent over to the SNY side. It was a lot of guys who got caught up in just some dumb bull crap and decided to tap. And a lot of it was people who were just afraid. Because prison is scary, and they decided to do time over with the rats instead of staying with the active inmates. As for pain medication, it gets a little bit more complex. if you want ibuprofen, aspirin, something like that, you can probably buy it on the canteen, or even up to like the stronger ibuprofen type of stuff. But if you need an actual pain medication, a narcotic, they're not going to give it to you on a regular yard. They're going to move you to a yard where it's regularly distributed. And being on these yards was always interesting, because in spite of the fact you would think that if you managed to get on this medication, you really needed it, there were a lot of guys who received far more pain medication than they actually needed, or at least had learned to tolerate the level of pain that they had when they didn't take their medication. And what they would do is the officer behind the window, or later the nurse behind the window, would give them their pill, and they would put it into a little paper cup and hand it to them, and your job is to take the pill. Well, they learned to hide it. They'd put it in the corner of their cheek or under their tongue, or maybe they could put it in the back of their throat and cough it out, so that they could walk out onto the yard and sell it, because their narcotics in prison are an incredible commodity. You have a lot of addicts who are willing to pay a lot to get high. Prison was a difficult place to do time. I suppose that I should actually be grateful, because CDC, and later CDCR, California, where I did my time, it was laid back compared to a lot of other systems. It was pretty serious compared to a lot of other systems too. I suppose it was somewhere in the middle. I'm really glad that I wasn't doing time in Guatemala. Though I did have a friend who did some time in a Mexican prison, and he told me that it was really laid back. It was a good place to do time, so long as you didn't cause trouble with the gangs. Which sounds to me like pretty much every prison everywhere. Just don't mess with the power structure, and hopefully you'll be alright. I think that I am going to be closing relatively soon, because frankly I don't know what else to speak on this subject: disability, infirmity, sickness in prison. I'd close by saying that prison is an awful place. It's awful whether you're healthy or sick. But to be in prison and to be sick makes it doubly awful, because not only are you in a prison, but you're in the smaller prison of your body. And to be in prison and disabled, to be in prison and be unable to defend yourself, is doubly terrifying. Because not only are you trusting that the people around you won't take advantage of your condition, but you're always having to work just a little bit harder than the guy next to you to do the same stuff. The walk to the chow hall is a lot longer if you have a walker or a cane. Standing in line to get your medicine is a lot harder the sicker you get. Prison's a hard place, and if you are sick, infirm, disabled, well, it's harder still. Thank you for listening today.